I don't think I told you about the time I was poisoned.
No.
But that's an interesting story about...
Is this when you were writing your book?
Yeah, the interesting story about being in shape.
I wanted to ask you about that too. Like,
I brought that up because about the being in shape thing.
Okay. What happened when you decided to write this book, and how did you go about writing the book?
Yeah, so initially, after I got out of the business, I started writing a book that I wanted to be an expose, that I wanted to interview other people that had jobs like mine, and the jackals, because I know quite a few of them. And I started contacting them, and almost immediately I got anonymous phone calls threatening my life and that of my infant daughter, who's now in her 40s, but yeah, she was an infant. And I was terrified because I knew what these people can do. I'd seen it. And at that time, I had just left the job at Charles T. Maine, and I get invited out to lunch by the president of Stone & Webster Engineering Company, huge engineering company, also out of Boston. And he takes me out to lunch, and he says, you know, you have a great resume. You were chief economist at one of our rival companies, and I want to use your resume in our proposals. I want to have the opportunity to do that. You don't have to do much work for us. Maybe I'll ask you to fly a private jet down to Rio de Janeiro once in a while, have dinner with some people or something. But you don't have to do much. Just let me use your resume, and I'm prepared to write you a check tomorrow morning for $500,000, $500,000 as a consultant's retainer. Now, this is in the late 80s. $500,000 is nothing to sneeze at today, but it was a lot more back then.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a bigger sneeze.
Quadruple, probably.
Yeah. So, and then he says, just don't write the book that I know you've been working on. So I'm getting exactly what I had dished out to presidents and others. I'm getting, okay, in this hand, I've got $500,000 for you. You don't have to do much to earn it. Just here it is. Oh, and when we're also going to pay you a monthly fee. In this hand, the jackal has been calling me, threatening my life and that of my daughter, getting exactly what I'd been dishing out, and I know this. What do I do? What would you do? What would you do, Danny? What would you do?
Yeah. Take the money and run.
Yeah. So I did. I took the money, and, you know, in my own defense, I'll say I didn't go out and buy fancy cars or a big house or something. I reinvested into going back to the Amazon and offering and forming a nonprofit called Dream Change to help the people of the Amazon protect the forest where I had lived and that had such a huge impact on me. And I started writing books about them. So I wrote 5 books on shamanism and indigenous people. Stone & Webster was fine with me doing that. In fact, they were happy that I'm writing books about things to get my name out there more and associated with them. But I didn't write the book that they told me not to write.
Okay.
And then many years later, my contract with Stone & Webster's over. New presidents come into Stone & Webster who knew me and didn't like me at all, didn't want me around. We had a history. So I'm in the Amazon with a group of people on 9/11. And when I got home, I was living in Florida at the time, I flew up to New York to Ground Zero. And as I stood there looking down into that pit, I knew I had to write about what I had done, which doesn't say there's a direct connection, but it just struck me that I needed to write about what I'd done. But I made the commitment at that point that I wouldn't contact other people. I wouldn't write an expose. I would write a confession, my personal story. And I wouldn't let anybody know I was doing it, because what got me into trouble before is I started contacting people. So, you know, if you're going to be a whistleblower, don't warn people you're going to blow the whistle.
Right.
Blow the whistle and make sure you get all your ducks lined up. And so I did that. I wrote the book, and it was interesting that it was rejected. It was rejected by 39 publishers. I get 39 rejection letters. That takes a lot of touching a lot of jaguars.
Yeah.
And then one publisher bought it, and it went to the New York Times bestseller list very quickly and stayed there for like 70 some odd weeks. And
now, weren't you worried about getting whacked?
No, at that point, I figure it's my best insurance policy. Once I got it in the hands
getting it published, you mean?
Yeah, but even getting it in the hands before it got published, even when I was being rejected, it's out there. There's no stopping it now. And if something strange happens to me, it's going to sell a lot more books. You know, shoot me now and see how many books get sold. You know?
Right.
So now I figured that was my best insurance policy. And I think I was right, except a few months after the book was published at the end of 2004, in early 2005, I was invited to speak at the United Nations. And I fly up to New York from Florida, and before I'm doing a lot of interviews. I did, a lot of interviews. And I have a publicist who works with a publishing company. And there's this one guy who wants to interview me, but he doesn't have very good credentials, so we've been putting him off. But finally, my publicist calls me, and she says, he's offered to pick you up at LaGuardia and to drive you to where you're going to stay tonight, which is a friend's house, an old friend on Central Park, and he'll take you out to lunch. That'd probably be better than taking a cab. Why don't you do it? So I did it. And we go to this restaurant, Italian restaurant, and I order it, and the meal comes, and I go to the restroom and I eat the meal. And this guy was lame. He just terrible journalist. He'd ask stupid questions, not like you.
Thank you.
and a couple hours later, I'm in my friend's apartment, and I lost over half the blood in my body through internal bleeding. Just gushed out of me. And my friend happened to be a producer at Tom Brokaw's NBC Nightly News. And she had a good friend who was a very well-known gastroenterologist, Pavarotti's gastroenterologist, calls him around 7 o'clock at night at home. And I get on the phone, and I'm shaking. I've gone into shock. And he says, you've got to get to Lenox Hill Hospital. Don't call an ambulance. Take a cab. The ambulances are too slow.
Right.
I'll call ahead and get intravenous set up for you.
Wow.
And get to you'll be dead in 2 hours. Oh. So I go to this hospital, and to make a long story short, they ended up taking out 70% of my large intestine, cutting it out. And we never thought much about it at the time. I was just trying to survive. And as soon as that happened and the word got out, and I obviously had to cancel the talk at the United Nations. My publicist did, and sent word out to everybody that I had these interviews set up with. He can't come. He just had, and people kept pouring in with email and phone calls saying, "Don't you realize John was poisoned?" Never had occurred. And I wasn't thinking. I'm suffering. I wasn't thinking. So I asked my gastroenterologist, and he says, well, it's possible, but we can't prove one way or another because as soon as we take something like that out, we incinerate it.
Oh, no.
So if the evidence is incinerated. But that guy disappeared. All my publicist had was his email address, and there was no response anymore. He basically disappeared. It wasn't any point in pursuing him because they had no evidence anyway.
You never could get a hold of him, nothing like that.
No.
So plus, that's pretty much in itself. That's proof that
it sounds pretty suspicious.
Yeah.
And then I called, while I was still in the hospital, I called this friend of mine who was a jackal, who's been in this business. And I said, hey, do you think that, what do you think? And he said, well, yeah, I think it probably was an assassination attempt. And I said, well, who do you think did it? And he said, well, definitely not the alphabet agencies, FBI, CIA.
Not them?
Not them. He said, if it had been them, you wouldn't be talking to me. And besides that, they don't want to see you dead because that's going to sell books. If you die from it, he said already, it was true. Already, book sales have gone spiked again. He said they're not too worried about books. It's just a book. It's out there. It's out there. Killing you is not going to stop the book from being out there.
Right. The book's it's already done.
The book's done. It's out there. And he said so. And I said, well, who then? And he said, well, I think it was. My guess is that it was a fanatic who either hates what you did as an economic hitman or hates the fact that you came clean on it. And I said, well, do you think I need to worry about him coming back? And he said, no, I don't think he'll show his face again. You know who he is now, and he's scared. These guys are cowards. He did a cowardly thing, and he probably feels that he scared the shit out of you, and he doesn't. And he's not going to show up. So he said, I don't think you need to be. Maybe there's others out there, but he said, you can't spend your life being worried about such things.